Great, thanks, Devin, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. So this is going to be about CINAHL and kind of some advanced things to do when searching. So kind of assuming some basic search knowledge, but kind of building on that. And again, my name is Catherine Howell. I'm a health sciences librarian at UNC. I work with nursing and kind of across a lot of different health disciplines, but I've done a lot of different things in CINAHL. One other thing I wanted to note kind of at the top of this presentation is that there has been an update to the way EBSCO databases look at many of your institutions. However, UNC did not switch formats. So you're going to see kind of an older EBSCO format being displayed. However, the functionality is still the same. So if anybody has any questions about if I'm demonstrating something and you can't find where it looks or where it might be in the new CINAHL, just let me know and we can pause and kind of work through that, but wanted to make you aware of that. Also, before I get started, it'd be helpful to know what kind of library everyone is joining from. If you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat, either what type of library you're at or even the library you're at would be great. Okay, great. So this seems like a good mix of some larger schools, some smaller schools, some community colleges. So it's good to know we kind of have a range here. So this should be relevant for almost everyone. So thank you for providing that. Oh, and somebody noted about the pronunciation. Yeah, it is a tough word to pronounce. I may or may not be pronouncing it correctly. So I'm just going to briefly cover the objectives for today's session. So first, we're going to talk about developing complex search strategies using subject headings, advanced search filters, and other features of CINAHL. Then we're going to talk about combining searches using the search history feature. And lastly, we'll export search results and save searches in different formats. So we'll get started with a bit of background. We'll talk about the database. I'll kind of set up an example topic that we'll use for a search and talk about why it's a good idea to craft an advanced search strategy. So about CINAHL or CINAHL, it covers nursing, physical therapy, occupational therapy, nutrition and dietetics, and other health-related professions beyond nursing. It indexes over 5,000 journals dating back to 1937. So the majority of its content are scholarly articles. However, it also includes books and book chapters, theses and dissertations, conference proceedings, evidence-based care sheets, and even research instruments. And so because I'm going to be doing a lot of demonstrating and talking about searching in this workshop, I'm going to kind of set up an example research topic that I'll follow kind of throughout, and you'll kind of see me build a search strategy on this specific topic. So the topic for today is going to be in older adults, what effect does physical activity have on cognitive function? And that topic is kind of in the PICO framework. So many of you all may be familiar with that. It stands for population, intervention, comparison, and outcome. So for intervention type studies or research, that's typically what's used. However, you may see multiple frameworks. This is just a kind of easy way to break out search concepts. So here, my search concepts are going to be the population of older adults, the intervention of physical activity, and the outcome of cognitive function. So when we're thinking about building the search, it'll be kind of in those three categories. As an initial search strategy to kind of start with what may be a more basic search and then build on that, I like to document things in a table like this. So you have kind of on the left the PICO element, or you could label it by concept if you're not using PICO, the search number, like the order in which you searched it, and then the specific kind of query or what you'll be entering into CINAHL. On the right, you have kind of the results for each step of the process. And we'll go over later kind of how to run it step by step and then combine it. But this is our initial kind of more simple search strategy. So it's essentially just for each concept, it's a couple of different keywords or synonyms. I'm using quotation marks for phrase searching, and I'm grouping each concept in parentheses, so doing nesting in order to keep those separate and then linking them with and. So hopefully that's all somewhat familiar to you. And at a more basic level, and we'll talk about kind of how to up level that and how to kind of improve those results and make them more relevant. So why should we craft an advanced search strategy? It's a very useful idea to kind of spend more time on the front end developing a search when you're working with somebody that needs to find all relevant information. So some kind of use cases for that might be you're helping with a systematic or scoping review or other kind of literature review. You might be assisting with a thesis or dissertation or a capstone paper, or you may just be helping faculty with their research, making sure that they're aware of everything that's available. And the reason to kind of craft this advanced search strategy is to balance what we call precision and sensitivity. And so what I mean by precision and sensitivity, this graphic can be a kind of helpful way of explaining that. So the green dots represent relevant results or things that answer my research question. And the pink dots are things that would not do that. They're not relevant. So a precise search is shown by the green circle, and that's when the majority or a very high percentage of your results are all relevant. You're getting very little that's irrelevant, mostly relevant. So you can see that in that green circle. A sensitive search, on the other hand, you can see is that big pink circle, and it captures almost the whole image. And while it captures way more relevant results, it captures almost all relevant results, but it does bring in a lot more irrelevant results as well. So when we think about searching, we kind of want to find a balance between the two. We want to kind of be somewhere in the middle where we're getting everything, but not wading through a ton of irrelevant information. So that's kind of the goal of developing these search strategies. So now I'll kind of talk about some different things we can do in CINAHL to advance our search strategy. So subject headings, field tags, filters, and then later we'll get to combining searches and exporting those results. Also, feel free, I'll be watching the chat, so if you have any questions as I go along, feel free to drop it in the chat, and then we'll have some occasions where I'll pause and wait for questions. So the first thing I want to cover are subject headings, which some of you may be familiar with. Many different databases have some form of controlled vocabulary, so PubMed, PsycInfo, Embase, a lot of databases will have this, but it's essentially a standardized list or thesaurus that's created by that database where things are kind of indexed using those subject headings. And the point is to standardize the words or phrases used to represent concepts. So you can see at the bottom of the screen, on the left, I kind of have some different terms that often show up when you're researching cancer. So we have cancer, tumor, carcinoma, or neoplasm. And then if I were to look that up, the subject heading up in CINAHL, it would be neoplasms is the specific term that CINAHL uses to kind of capture all of those under one banner. So it's labeled with MH, and I'll show you how to look that up and get that correct syntax. But it's kind of the word it uses, and it will find kind of these other things, but standardizes that. And what I would really recommend, I think it's best practice to include subject headings alongside of keywords, even if some of them are duplicative, because keywords are going to be what the author uses or the authors use in their writing, whereas the others are kind of coded by the database. So it's a really good idea to have both. I also note on here that you have the option to explode some of the subject headings. That's represented by a plus mark. What that means is that it will find any references indexed to the term itself, as well as references indexed to any of the narrower subheading kind of subject terms beneath it. So for neoplasms, if I explode that, it'll find specific types of cancer, specific treatments for cancer, and things like that that may be a little bit more narrow, but it kind of finds everything under that banner. So now I'll demonstrate where to find those in CINAHL. So again, some of you all may be on the newer interface. I'm still on the older interface. What you're going to be looking for are CINAHL subject headings, which will either be at the top on this bar or below the search. You'll see subject headings as a choice and kind of a menu there. So you'll click on that, or you may just see the search bar automatically. This is the simple search you'll use to look up terms. And I recommend kind of searching as many things as possible to make sure you're getting all the relevant terms for your concepts. So first I'll start with aged. or like aged adults or older adults, which is my first concept. And I click on browse, and this kind of shows you a list kind of in relevancy order, or what it thinks is relevant. You can see that there's one for aged, and there's even a more specific one for aged 80 and over, so that even more specific kind of age range. If you click into the term itself, it shows you the tree view, which can be useful for seeing kind of what's below and above it. So here with aged, we have aged 80 and over beneath it, as well as hospitalization of older persons and frail elderly. I really want all of those, so I'm going to click on the term itself, and you can see you have some options here. This is where you can choose whether or not to explode it. So if I click that, it kind of tells it to add that explode syntax. Major concept, if you select this essentially tells CINAHL that you want it to be under that heading, but that's one of the major headings. I typically don't recommend this because if it is a heading in general, it's typically something you'd probably want to look at. So I'd probably stray away from choosing that, but that's kind of essentially what it means. You can also click here to get some scope notes on kind of what's encompassed under here. And then it automatically includes all these different subheadings. If you're doing something more specific and one of these in particular is more relevant to you, you can select that. To do the searcher to see what that syntax looks like, you have to click search database. It's kind of annoying, you kind of almost have to do it every time. And what I would recommend is kind of grabbing this and then adding it to your search documentation. So this one will look like MH, which is a field tag, and then the specific term in quotation marks, and either a plus sign or no plus sign, depending on whether or not you exploded it. And again, it's a really good idea to check multiple things. So another one of my concepts is physical activity as the intervention. So I'll check for that, and you'll see they do have physical activity. It's not an explodable concept, so you can't explode it. But if I check that and click search database, it'll appear here. So very similar syntax to the other one. And I would continue to do that for each concept and add in as many as you think are relevant. So this is kind of what our original search would look like with those subject headings added. Again, I didn't add every single one that's relevant, just one or two for each category. But you can kind of see that syntax we grabbed before. You would just add it in, each one kind of in parentheses with or onto those original keywords. You can see that this increases our results from what we had before. It was around 5,000 and now it's a lot higher. This is doing a lot for sensitivity. So we're really kind of trying to pull in anything that may be relevant. Some of the other strategies we'll do will kind of get that number back down, but initially adding those subject headings will make your search results larger, as you can see here. The next thing I want to talk about are field tags. So those essentially tell the database where to look for the search terms that you're entering in. So I kind of have some common ones listed on this slide. Frequently, people will use title, abstract, or alt text. Alt text is, I believe, the default if you don't enter any tag at all. So the title will tell it, I want you to search for these keywords and they must be in the title of the articles that get returned. Same thing with abstract. Alt text will look at any of the entry fields. And then some other options are you can do author, date, or language. So we'll talk later on about filtering. Using the date or language field tags are a way to build in that filter into your search syntax. And so for this example, let's say that I want to make sure that these terms show up in the abstract. You'll often see for systematic reviews, especially, that you'll see title and abstract together, where you would duplicate the ab portion and then do it again with title in front of it. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to do abstract, but that's telling the database that these terms are so important to me that I want them to be in the abstract of every returned article. So I want them to be a very important concept for those. And that does bring our results down by about 600. So that's, again, focusing that search just a little bit more. And you can play around with different ones there. You'll see that I put in parentheses all of my keywords that are not subject headings and put abstract in front of all of those. So it tells it to look for those all together, and kind of look for any of those. The next thing I'll talk about are filters. Many of you all are probably familiar with these. CINAHL does have some more advanced ones or some more refined ones. So some of the options that you'll see are date, language, source type. So that's, is it a article? Is it a conference paper, etc.? There's kind of a binary checkbox for peer reviewed and also for full text. Those are filters that are available. I typically don't recommend to check either one of those, especially not the full text, because that will only find things that are indexed in CINAHL, but you may have other databases that have access to other things. And so by clicking full text, you'll exclude some things that you may have wanted to review. Same thing with peer reviewed. Typically, a lot of what you'll find will be peer reviewed anyways, and that's something you can kind of check on later rather than telling the database to sort for that. CINAHL also interestingly allows you to filter by age group or by geography. It has options for geography, both where it was published and where the research was performed. But I would really recommend for those types of filters to build it into the search instead. So in my search, we do have an age group. My population is older adults. And I think it's a better strategy to build it in there and have that be my search rather than to use a filter to get there. And that's because you're relying on CINAHL to have coded things correctly. And it's kind of a better idea to do that in the search itself. Same thing with geography. You can build in if there's a specific location, like country or region you're looking for, or alternatively, you could just look through the results to make sure they're from the correct location. So typically the filters I see used most frequently in more complex searches are date and language. And date just because the researcher is interested in a specific period of time or a specific amount of recency, and language just because many people don't have the ability to do translations. So on some really big systematic review projects, somebody will be able to pay for translation services, but typically you might want to limit that to English just to avoid getting results that won't be able to be read. There are a few different ways to add filters. When you're on the advanced search page, right below that, you'll see a very kind of extensive list that you can click on with different filter options. You can also do that after you've done the search. There's a refine results menu on the left side of the screen after you've searched. And I'll also show you how to add that in with syntax. So you can use a field code and add it in that way as well. So I'm going to hop back into CINAHL. So if I click on advanced search here, this is kind of where some of those filters live. One quick note about search modes and expanders, you'll see that when you're here. I would always leave it on proximity. They have a few other options, but find all my search terms kind of automatically adds and in between words to your searches, and find any of my search terms automatically adds or between everything, even, two words next to each other. So I really wouldn't recommend doing that. I would use your syntax instead to kind of capture some of those things. And smart text searching, what that means is that you can paste in like a whole paragraph of text and it'll try to pull out keywords from that. But again, I think the best bet for an advanced search is to word it yourself. Also, the default is to have apply equivalent subjects checked. So that's typically what I leave on. So here's kind of where a lot of these filters live. Some are just simple checkboxes, like the English language one, full text, again, which I wouldn't recommend for a specific type of article. You can even filter for randomized controlled trials if that's of interest. And some of the ones here, like geography, publication type, sex, and age. So there's really an extensive number, but a lot of these things you can build into the search too. I just wanted to make you aware of kind of that functionality. So that's one place to find those. Another option is after you've already searched. I hide my search history. So you can see here on the left, you have the refined results. That's going to be a similar amount of filters as before. So you'll kind of have the ability to drag this over to limit publication date or type in this box. Here's kind of where I was talking about source types. You'll see the vast majority are going to be from academic journals, but there's some other kinds of content here. The vast majority here is English, but again, you can choose to filter to just show that. And it also kind of has these age, gender, and geography filters where you can kind of see how many results are coming for each one. So that can be interesting to play around with. It's a nice view to do it in the results because it does give you numbers there. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint now. The way I would recommend adding it in, just to keep kind of with this same documentation style, is to use those field tags and add it in that way. So you can kind of search it like you would anything else. So for date, our publication date, the field tag is DT. In this example, I have just the last 10 years, so 2015 through 2025. LA is the field tag for language, and I just typed in English. So that's what that would look like. And I did it kind of as a separate search and then added it in. And you can see that really takes my results way down again. So originally we had 5,000, 6,000, and that really drops that number down to 3,500, which is still a large number. There are different ways to do that. This could be a very broad search, but this is a pretty good starting place and what I would consider an advanced search. So I'm going to pause now because that was a lot of information. And see what kinds of questions people have about what I just covered. So feel free to either unmute or post in the chat. I'm seeing a question from Liz about, is there any difference between using field tags versus the limiters provided? No, it should be exactly the same. So if you were to, you should get the exact same result numbers, whether or not you limit it to 10 years or whether you did that by adding in that field tag and putting it in the search directly. The real only reason why I do that is just to have that documentation. It's somewhat easier, but you could also, just type out like a note that you limited it that way. For some of the limiters, though, I will note that it's better to use those limiters or to kind of click those check boxes or to select those things for things like age group or things like that, because they're kind of already predetermined for you. But for things like language or date, those are pretty easy to add in using field tags. Carrie, that's a good question. Yes, this is very similar to what I use. And I can provide a link to, we have a guide here at UNC that has some downloadable templates for that, but typically, yeah, we'll have, for each database, we'll have something similar to this where we break it up by concept. We have the exact query and we kind of have the results and then the combined results at the bottom. Oh, that's a good point to read the question. So Carrie's question was, if you're using CINAHL for a systematic review, the table shown on the screen, is that what we would use to document your search? So yes, a very similar one. Are there any other questions at this time? All right, I'm not seeing any, so I'm gonna keep going, but we'll have time for questions later on as well. So I also wanted to go over, I covered some kind of specific ways to advance your search, and there are some additional syntax related things that I didn't have in my example, but that may be relevant for some of the searches you're doing. Some of these you may or may not already be aware of. So we already talked about using quotes for phrase searching and doing nesting. Those are forms of syntax, but some that I didn't use today. First is truncation. So that's using an asterisk in CINAHL. And when you do that at the end of a word, that finds alternative endings to a word. So you kind of start that at a point where that's where you want alternative endings. I will note to be careful with that. The earlier you put it in a word or the smaller amount of letters you have before that asterisk, you may get things that you're not expecting. So in systematic reviews, typically, often people will instead choose to just list out the different forms using or to avoid that. But if it's something simple like the singular and the plural, or like, you know, a few different alternative endings, this could be an easier way to get that done. So the example here is depress with an asterisk. That would find depression, depressing, anything else that kind of starts with that. There's also truncation within words, so that's using the same asterisk. The example here is for sulfur, so S-U-L asterisk U-R. That's a word that can be spelled different in American English and British English. And so if you were to do that here, and because it's different letters, it's not just like an extra letter added, it's either an F or a PH in British English, it'll find either one of those. So it can replace one character or multiple characters, either one. I see truncation at the end of the word much more commonly than I do in the middle of a word. Another thing that you may have seen is a mandated wildcard. That's shown by a question mark. The really common example is women or woman. That's only replacing one letter. So when you put that question mark in place of a letter, it automatically replaces it with something one-to-one. So woman or women there. That's a little different than the optional wildcard, which is shown below there. That replaces either 0 or 1 letter. So again, it's a niche use case, but a good example is the word pediatric, which again differs in the UK. They spell it with an extra A in there. And so by inserting that symbol, it'll either add the A or search it without the A. So you'll find both forms of that word. So that's just an easier way to do it. Sometimes it's even like remembering that you can even just write pediatric or, you know, the British spelling, but it is an option to use. The other syntax options we have are proximity operators. So there's two different ways to do that, both near and within. They're pretty similar. Essentially, what proximity operators do, they're really good with a phrase, but a phrase that can be variable or said a bunch of different ways. So you'll write N or W and then a number there, and that tells how many words away you want it to be. So in this example, we have disturb with an asterisk or truncation, and 3 sleep. And that says find some form of disturbance within 3 words of the word sleep. And because it's a near proximity, using the N, it can be in any order. So it'll find sleep disturbances. So with sleep in the front, it'll find disturbed sleep. It'll find any of those kinds of things. Or disturbed while, you know, within sleep, that kind of thing. Even with words in between it, it'll find it. So that can be really helpful. Within proximity is very similar, except for that just mandates the order the words have to be in. So that says you want to find disturbed sleep, but you're not interested in sleep disturbances, or if the words were to be switched around, that would not be relevant anymore. So that's essentially how that works. That one can be a bit more complicated, but has a lot of use cases, especially in the more complex searches like systematic reviews. All right. So now I'll get into another demonstration. I'm going to walk through how to use search history to kind of create those tables that I was showing before, where I have kind of the results for each of my searches and then combining them all up together. I'll also talk about how to save the search to access later, as well as how to export it. So to find search history, again, yours may look a little different than mine. You're going to click, sorry, I'm just deleting this search here. You'll click this drop down that says search history. Hopefully it looks similar to that in the updated version as well. And that essentially below your search will kind of drop down a list of everything you've searched. Just to clear it up, I'm going to select and delete them. And then, so essentially, I'll kind of demonstrate what my search looks like. So I'll grab that first set of terms. So if we're searching each of them separately, you'll just enter in that syntax and click search. And you'll see now it pops up, it has the number of results, which you can grab for that table, or you can view those results, and it has that syntax written out there for you. So you do that for each one, making sure to delete the one before and add in the new one. So those are my physical activity terms. And then we have my cognition, learning, or cognitive function terms. And so you can see here, that's where those numbers come from. So they're typically very, very large numbers when you're searching each concept separately, and it's combining them that makes them much more narrow because these are all OR searches. So to combine them all together, oh, and I forgot the filters. So then my last one here is just going to be dictating that the age or the publication date range and the fact that I want them to be in English. You can see here that's a huge result because that's just everything the database has from the past 10 years in English. And then to combine that all together, what you'll do in search history is you will select all like this. I'm going to back this out because sometimes it gets confused and grabs what's in there as well. I'm going to select all of that and click search with and. You also have the option to click search with or, but because we're combining concepts, I'll click search with and. And that's what gives you kind of that final result number here when it's all combined. And then to view, so by doing this, the results show below as well as in the table. Just note that the search history only is available during the time you're using the database until it times out. And it does time out very frequently, which is why documentation is such a good idea. So you might perform a search and like a couple hours later be like, wait, what did I search? In CINAHL and other EBSCO databases, it disappears pretty quickly. So just make sure to kind of capture this before that happens. So again, yeah, we have our results down here. And the other things that I wanted to show you are options for saving and exporting. So some of you all may have a free EBSCO account. It's not linked to your institution. It can be linked to whatever email address you'd like. You'll click sign in the top right is where it should be to create an account. And that can allow you to save down searches. So this is kind of what my folder looks like. If you click at the top, you can save actual articles to it, although you can only do the number shown in the first page at a time. So that typically is not what I would do, but it can be a good option to save specific searches so you can research them later. And the way to do that is to go back and click save searches / alerts. And then this is both the way to save the search down in your EBSCO account and to create a search alert if that's of interest to you. So essentially a search alert is an email that comes up with everything new that's been added since the last time. And so you will simply make sure that CINAHL is created. You'll name it something so that you can remember. It will save all those individual sources and link them together. You'll want to make sure you save it permanently. Otherwise, it will just be for 24 hours. Or if you're interested in an alert, you click alert, and that'll allow you to select when you get emails for that search. I've sometimes had faculty members that are interested in search alerts, so I've sometimes helped them with that process. But otherwise, to just save the search, you'll do it this way. And that way you can kind of come back in and easily refresh those numbers if needed within your account. So I'll save that really quick. And so now you'll see under saved searches, I have this one that shows up and I can either edit it or retrieve the saved search. And if I click on that, that'll rerun that search. So it saves that syntax information, but that doesn't save the actual results at that point in time, which is why I'd recommend exporting. So to do that, we'll go back to our search history and back to these results. So to export results, you'll do that from the results page itself. And again, I hope it looks similar in the new format, but to export it, you're going to click on this share button here at the top of the screen. Oh, and I'm noticing the chat. So that was, I think, that one of the things that changed with the new update is kind of changing mostly the look and feel. I'm hoping it works somewhat similarly. I know that UNC in particular, a lot of things changed that people were not happy with, so we stayed and like kind of reverted to the old version, and I know some other institutions did that as well. But I do think it's going to be a permanent change as of this summer. I think right now we're kind of, most people are on a preview basis of it. And let's see, so people were able to find the search history. Yeah, so I'm happy to help with that. I'll provide my email at the end of the presentation. Because that is a good question on how to add previous searches if that's not readily apparent. So to share or to export a search, you'll click on this share button here right at the top of the results where it has the result number. This is another way to kind of set up an email alert or add your search to the folder. It also has a permalink to repeat the search. But what you're going to look for exporting is this link at the bottom that says export results. I will note that some institutions, for most of you all, this should be an option that's turned on, but it is something that has to be opted into by your e-resources librarian or whoever controls that access. Typically, yeah, so it may not be available, and that may be something you want to inquire about. But this is the best and easiest way to export everything all at once. So for systematic reviews or just in general, when you want to get all the results out and put them in a reference manager or whatever, this is the best option. If you don't have this option, you would have to, increase the amount of results shown per page, and then kind of export it kind of one by one or save it one by one, page by page, which is not as convenient. But if you click export here, you have to select what kind of format you want. And there's a few different options. The most typical one we'll see is RIS format. So for those of you that use EndNote, Zotero, or another reference manager, just make sure you click that because it's not the default. And what will happen here is you make sure to enter in your email address, and then usually within about 10 minutes, you'll get an email with a link to then download that file, and you can then upload that file into your reference manager of choice or into a software like Covenants if it's for a systematic review or a literature search. Does anybody else have any questions about any of those factors? Oh, Carrie notes that she often exports her results to her Gmail because university firewalls often block the emails from EBSCO. That's interesting. I haven't had that issue here, but I can imagine that's a problem. So anybody else that runs into that, definitely use an alternative email address. I also wanted to provide you with some additional resources on CINAHL. So there's obviously EBSCO itself has kind of a database of information there. They call it the knowledge base, with some frequent questions, which will hopefully be helpful, especially with some of these questions about like the new format or where certain things are. I also really like the University of Minnesota's CINAHL LibGuide. It's a really good resource that has a lot of different information there. So I'd also recommend you checking that out. I don't have an easy way to do that while I'm presenting, but you will get a copy of all these slides with the links in them afterwards, if that would be all right. Okay, so that's the end of my planned content. And so I'd be happy to answer any additional questions you all may have. I would also be interested to hear kind of what different things you use for your advanced searches or what you've used in the past and what's worked well. So happy to have a discussion or question and answer either way.
Folks, feel free to share in the chat any questions that you might have.
Also, just so you know, I have my contact information shown on the screen and it'll be available in the slide. So if there's any questions you have about something specifically I talked about today, please feel free to email me and I'd be happy to help if I can. And Jordan in the chat just noted that they like using PubMed and said that the mesh thesaurus is really similar to the subject headings of CINAHL, where you can explode a subject heading to get to synonyms and narrower terms. Yeah, PubMed is really great and you'll often find that almost not all, but many of the subject headings are going to be the same as mesh, but with some differences, but largely very similar.
We just got a
Yes.
question about the EBSCO account. So are the EBSCO accounts specific to individual databases, or can you create a single login for all EBSCO databases?
That's a great question, and I think Carrie just answered that. It's for all of EBSCO. So again, it's not linked to your institution or anything like that, which can sometimes be confusing. You have to create that account using the email address of your choice. I used a Gmail account, and then for any database, you can use that account. So PsycInfo, Eric, CINAHL, it'll all be the same, and it should note like where the search is. Like if you're doing something like saving a search, it'll know which database it's in, so you can kind of differentiate there. Or whichever database you're in, it's going to default to showing the things that you've done already in that database.
We have a question from Tara. When translating search strategies across databases, do you know if there should be a difference in the number when it comes to proximity slash adjacency searching? Like in Ovid, Medline would just be AJ3, and in CINAHL, it should be N4.
That's a great question. Yeah, translation can be tricky. I think you've got that right here. In Medline versus CINAHL, it should work the same whether you're using the kind of adjacent tag or the near tag. I believe those are the most similar. I could look further into that, but from my memory, that's correct. So it does the same thing. It looks within 3 words of either of those. And you could, as far as the number, one thing I forgot to mention, the number with proximity searching, 3 was the example. We've had a colleague of mine did some research to look at what like an optimal number for proximity might be. We found pretty good results with around 5 being the number, like within 5 words. Once you got further afield or further apart, it wasn't as helpful in finding things. So you can adjust that number. But for that translation, I believe it would be the same number in either database. I haven't used Ovid Medline because we don't have that here as much, but I think that should be the similar syntax. One really great tool is the polyglot search tool, if you're not aware of it. It works mostly with PubMed. You put in a PubMed search strategy and it will automatically translate the syntax into different databases, different commonly used kind of health sciences databases. And that's a really excellent, that can do some of that for you, but not everything. Jordan has a good question. They said on the old CINAHL or the one that I've been demonstrating, there's an evidence-based care tab, but it's not he can't see it in the new one, or they can't see it in the new one. And they want to know if they would need to search the topic to see that content. That's a good question. Does anybody that has that new format, are they able to find that? I can also do a quick search to see. I'm gonna see really quickly if EBSCO
So
itself has some information.
in the new format, in the filter section under the search bar, you can check the box for evidence-based practice, and those care sheets will come up. There's also a title list for all of the evidence-based care sheets in CINAHL that I can drop in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for finding that. Interestingly, the thing I was able to find has not been updated for the new format and just says, find it at the toolbar. Oh, and then Carrie has a question about polyglots translations. That's that tool I was talking about from the Systematic Review Accelerator. I would say it really depends on how complex the searches you're doing are. I think it does a really excellent job with simple things. For if you're using proximity operators and things like that, it does not do a good job. But in terms of like changing the quote marks, changing some of the field tags and things like that, a lot of the, like if you're doing a really long search and it would be kind of tedious to go in and, you know, change all your single quotes to double quotes and things like that. It does a really good job with those more simple tasks. It doesn't do a good job at proximity operators, and it also doesn't do a good job at subject heading. So it can't automatically translate that subject heading for you. You do need to go in and double check what it is in that other database. So that's a good question. One other tool that my colleagues and I have been using often to translate things is actually using a chatbot like ChatGPT or Copilot. It's really good at those kind of those tasks where you give it a lot of instruction and say, okay, this is in this format. I need you to remove, you know, change single quotes to double quotes, change, you know, this field tag to this field tag, that kind of thing. So if you give it a lot of instructions, it almost performs better than Polyglot, and you can kind of dictate what it's doing for you. So that's another good option. And Dr. Williams says that she's not happy with this new interface in CINAHL, and I think that is consensus held by a lot of people. So I'm hoping, I think a lot of libraries, including UNC, are kind of pushing back on that. I'm not sure if that, you know, will make them kind of revert some of the changes. But I'm not sure if it's final yet. So if it's not final, hopefully improvements can be made. Carrie asked if I have any copies of the instructions for using Gen AI chatbots. Feel free to email me. I don't have necessarily you know, like in, you know, detail, like it's written out instructions, but I do have some prompts that I've played around with that have worked well. And I'd be happy to share those with you. So feel free to just shoot me an email and I can send you what I have.